Hello and welcome to another episode of Christian Squared, where pastors and professors come to discuss topics that are relevant to the church today. I'm Christian Mishagna, and I'm with my co-host, Kristen Fahey, and we are very blessed to have as a guest tonight Dr. Alan Streett, who serves as a research professor, Emeritus, of biblical theology at Criswell College in Dallas, Texas. Tonight, during this episode, we're going to be discussing Dr. Streett's forthcoming book due in October. It's titled Exploring the Paranormal Miracles, Magic, and the Mysteries. As we look into this book, Dr. Streett, could you kind of just give us a four-stage synopsis of your spiritual journey? It's incredibly unique, and I think it's important for our listeners to just kind of use that to set the table for our discussion during this episode.
I first got involved in what I would call the occult as a result of an injury, a baseball injury that I had, and I was trying to signed a professional baseball contract, and this looked like a life-changing injury. And I went to a psychic healer. And so as a result of that, I got drawn into the psychic, reading books on Edgar Cayce and a lot of people that were famous back in those days. Then that would call that stage one. That would be my psychic or my occult experience. And I was really into it. And I thought the occult really was a gift from God, like psychic healing was a gift from God. The second stage is I go to seminary, and while I'm at seminary, I have a radical conversion experience. And as a result of that, somebody invites me to a church, and I go to the church, and I hear a speaker who says the occult and all those occultic gifts are from the devil. They're counterfeit gifts. And I believe this person. They showed scripture. And as a result of that, I made a 180, and I began to say the occult was of the devil. And I became a researcher on cults and had a ministry, a counter cult ministry. And I basically tried to expose the occult as being demonic. That would be my second stage, cult buster stage. Mm-hmm. Third stage is that I'm now teaching college, and I have a guest speaker come to my classroom who is a professional magician. And this guy said, these people aren't demon possessed. These people are all fakers. And the speaker's name was Danny Quirm, and he wrote a book called The Fakers. And he said they just know magic tricks and pass themselves off as having power, but it's all deception. So I became what I would call a skeptic. I became skeptical of these kinds of people and basically labeled them as fakes or fakers. Yeah. And then the fourth stage happened many years later, where I started to teach a Bible study real early on Sunday morning. And I set my alarm to get up for NPR. And it was just so I get up 6 o'clock in the morning. And when the thing didn't ring, as the radio came on, and it was a program called Humankind, and that woke me up. And while I'm lying in bed, I hear about a medical doctor, Herbert Benson, who was very famous, who began to explain the psychic experiences and paranormal experiences as not really demonic or magic, but he said they were really the results of the subconscious mind. And we can reach certain states in our brain. You know, we can slow down our brain activity, and we can have transcendental experiences. And that led me on a search to discover the true nature of psychic gifts. And I sort of came to a conclusion that most of these gifts are very natural, or experiences are very natural. Mm-hmm. And it's a result of the brain slowing down. And when you go from what's called the alpha or the beta brain waves, which are when we're awake and alive, and in the middle of the day, our brain is racing a mile a minute. And that's when we're thinking critically. And so that's called the beta stage. But your brain can't operate that way all the time. has to slow down. And that's
Sure.
why you get sleepy and you say, oh, I'm going to take a break and get a cup of coffee. And some people take a power nap, or they just close their eyes. And what happens is your brain slows down. And when it slows down, you can have all kinds of experiences. First of all, you start imagining things.
Yeah.
That's first of all. Obviously, you know, you're maybe at work, you sort of close your eyes, you start imagining things. All kinds of activity are going on around you, but you're not there. You're at the beach somewhere, you know, in your mind. You hear the waves. Somebody's talking to you, but you don't hear them. Your ears are working, but you don't hear them. And so I began to study the relationship between the brain and paranormal experiences. And that's pretty much where I've settled. I don't say that there's not demons out there. I don't say that there aren't fakers out there. There are people like that. But I think most of these things can be explained naturally. The problem is when people try to explain them according to, most people have wrong interpretations of what's happening.
Sure.
They'll say God spoke to them when he may not have spoke to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they didn't have the experience, it's how they interpret the experience.
Yeah, and I know in your book you explain, and the cool thing about you're not only a professor, that you did serve in pastoral ministry, and you mentioned, I think twice, there were times where you did pray for people, and they were healed. One of them was significant. The fella had some kind of growth on his side, and I think it was, I can't remember the exact if it was a male or female, but you did pray for them, and something happened. How with your research and all that you've worked on, how do you interpret what actually transpired there?
Well, I do believe in the supernatural, so I'm not a naturalist.
Yeah.
And I do believe that God at times, you know, breaks in and heals people, performs a miracle. And those things I would classify as miracles. The man that you're talking about really didn't have any faith at all.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to have an operation like on a Wednesday, came to church on a Sunday. And I always had an opportunity where people could come and I'd pray for him. And this guy came up and said, would you pray for me? And he said in his stomach, his abdomen, he had a lump the size of a baseball, and you could actually see it bulging out. So I prayed for him. And when he went in, it was gone.
Fantastic.
So, you know, either that was, a doctor might call it spontaneous remission, but that's how he would explain it. I can't explain it. So a miracle is, or you know, real healing, spiritual healing is as good as spontaneous remission. You really can't explain a lot of these things, and that's the problem. We're trying to explain everything precisely.
Do you find that especially in this realm, things get really murky because people, for example, will ascribe certain either certain experiences, or they'll say, if I were to quote Dr. Freeman would have come down heavily on the idea of any kind of use of any kind of hypnotic technique, whether you're hypnotizing somebody else or hypnotizing yourself. You said, oh, that's demonic. That's bad.
Right.
But people ascribe something, but there's really no way to prove it one way or the other because you're dealing in the unseen realm. And so I think negatively people can, and I don't think necessarily that they're trying to scare people, but it has that net effect. Okay. And one of the things that we, Christian and I, have had this ongoing discussion for about the last 7 or 8 months in this particular realm, where, for example, the Catholic Church, when they're diagnosing people with problems, they look at everything natural. You know, they just give it a full diagnostic. And as a very last resort, really, will they ascribe something to that realm that they can't explain?
Right.
Most of the time, it might be personal problems. It might be a biochemical thing. Is that kind of the same thing where your research in the stages brought you out to? It's just like, okay, we're ascribing everything right here to something from the Twilight Zone, and it's not necessarily the case.
Right. So what I think is that 99% of the people approach paranormal experiences with presuppositions.
That's a fair read.
That's basically it. So if they are people who believe in the psychic phenomena, they will believe that they either have a special gift, psychic gift, or this gift comes from God. That's where that's their starting point. If they happen to be Christians and they maybe have a charismatic background or fundamentalist background, and they might interpret the psychic gifts as being demonic. That's their starting point.
Yeah.
They would never say, well, maybe it's real. They start with it's demonic. And so I think that's what happens. And my friend who was the magician, he started with the presuppositions that everything was a fake. Because he could pull off these things that look like miracles. I mean, he claimed that he could you could think he was talking to the dead and getting a message from the dead.
Yeah.
He could read your mind, but it was all a trick. And so he assumed all these people were tricksters. They just weren't professional magicians, but they knew the magician secrets. And so you start off with all these presuppositions. And I went through those stages, but I was never totally satisfied. It just didn't make sense. When I started really thinking about it, it didn't make sense. Everything isn't demon possession, And I've read Paul Meyer, who was a psychiatrist and started the Meyer Clinic, a very famous psychiatrist. Psychiatrist. He said in a book that I read that he has never met anybody that was demon possessed.
Yeah.
He says many people are brought in and they are labeled demon possessed, but as soon as he gives them whatever it is, lithium or whatever, it's amazing how the demons go away.
There is that.
So he said he's never seen that. So are there demon possessed people? Yes, I guess. I haven't really seen one. I can't prove I've seen one.
Yeah.
Maybe they are overseas, in underdeveloped countries. But if you start off with presuppositions, you're going to always fall into a trap.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's like basically you discover what you're looking for.
That's right.
It's a confirmation bias thing.
It's a confirmation. That's exactly right. It's confirmation bias.
And as you see what's going on the church fabric today, your part in your book where you become like a mentalist was absolutely fascinating to me.
Yeah. Please unpack that. Explain.
Yeah.
And fake and true mentalists. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So here's what happens. I started studying magic after this lecturer came to my class who was a magician, and I went to the library and started getting magic books. And the first thing I discovered in this magic textbook was a story about shamans and holy men and witch doctors over in Africa and India who were doing these so-called miracles, and some American magicians happened to go into the village and recognized immediately they were just magic tricks. And when they confronted the shaman and the witch doctors, they admitted it was a magic trick.
Yeah.
But and they had the people fooled, and that's how they kept their power. So when I read that, I said, well, maybe everything is just a magic trick. And so I said, I'm going to learn more about this. And then I discovered there was a certain branch of magic called mentalism, which deals with psychic tricks.
Yeah.
You can pass yourself off as being a psychic and read people's minds and things like that.
And make a lot of money on late night TV.
Right. I mean, there was the amazing Kreskin was a mentalist a number of years ago. He's still going around, by the way. I just looked him up on the internet yesterday. He's 93 years old and he's still doing mentalism. So
nice work if you can get it.
I remember watching him on television and thinking,
I think he was on Johnny Carson.
Yes.
Yes.
I thought he has unbelievable psychic powers. And he never said he didn't. He never said he did. He just said he had a special power. And it was. He learned tricks, how to do these things. And so,
now, to be clear, for our listeners, though, when you said magic tricks, you're talking about sleight of hand, stage tricks.
Right. So when you say magic tricks, there's different branches of magic. So there's sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one kind of magic trick. And then there's illusions, and that's where you cut a woman in half. That's an illusion. Looks like
okay.
But it's not. But then you have what's another branch, which is called mental magic. And you don't do anything except read people's minds, predict the future, but it's all a trick. It's all a trick.
Is it akin to, like, there was a show that was famous in the last 20 years that I would binge on called Lie to Me, and you could read. You
Right.
remember that?
I do remember that. Yeah. So the guy was able to pick up tells or little cues when somebody was lying, and he could discern that. And that's what a mentalist does. The mentalist can look at you and within 10 seconds say several things about you that'll make you think they know your entire life.
Wow.
You know, but it literally takes to be a mentalist. I mean, talking about not somebody at my level, but a professional mentalist takes years of practice. But you learn all kinds of tricks, and there's books out there, and there's muscle reading where you can just, like Kreskin would, the amazing Kreskin would ask the audience to hide his paycheck. And I mentioned this in the book. And he would go out maybe in the hallway, and they would hide his paycheck somewhere in the auditorium. And he had no idea where it was. And then if he couldn't find it within like 10 minutes, he would forfeit his speaking engagement of thousands of dollars or give it to charity or something. And he would come in and he would just take one person in the audience and he would hold their hand like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would start moving around the auditorium. And this is called muscle reading. And he, based on muscle reading, he could tell exactly where that paycheck was. Because believe it or not, when you get close to something, when he would get close to the paycheck, the person would just give a little tug. They wanted to move away from that area. And he could read the muscles in this person's body.
That is incredible.
This show just shows you how this is I'll explain this. I shouldn't be giving away all these tricks. But here's another one was when he was away from the check, there would be noise in the audience. People would talk to each other. But when he got close to where the check was hidden, suddenly everything got real quiet. And he knew he was real close. And he had mastered that. Only once in 50 years as a mentalist did he ever have to forfeit his check. He found every paycheck.
And it wasn't that he was getting supernatural knowledge from the other side. He read people like a book.
It's a trick. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was a master.
Like a human metal detector or something going on there.
It is amazing what you can do. And so when I learned how to do this, I said, well, I was a pastor of the church. I said, let's have a evening. It was on a Halloween, Sunday evening. Halloween came on a Sunday. I said, I'm going to have a psychic expose. I'm going to show you how they do it. Mm-hmm. And so I put on a mentalism program for an hour and 45 minutes or something. And I was reading people's minds and telling them where they lived and what kind of car they drove. And, you know, even some of the conversations that they had earlier in the day. I mean, one of the way you do it is you just go into the bathroom and you go into the stall and close the door. And you sit there and you wait for the people to come in, let's say the men's room, and you look at the shoes. And you look through the little slot in the door and you see who it is. And the guy said, man, I'm really mad that, Mickey Lolich lost today.
Yeah.
And the Detroit Tigers lost today. And then you got information. So then all you do is when the program begins 30 minutes later, you go out and say, I'm seeing a gentleman here who's a tremendous baseball fan. And you just sort of feed the answer to them that you already have, that they've given to you.
That's what I was stunned by, though. I mean, I'm stunned by that, and I can't help but laughing. We're just kind of falling all over ourselves, realizing how easy it is to be had. But I was shocked because I did not know this. I was never certainly taught this by Hobart Freeman. That when you gave the history, for example, of the Fox sisters, that late in life, as they were approaching death, it was like, we made this all up. And I think Arthur Ford was the same way, right?
Right. So what you have is this is where fakery comes in. And there was the founders of spiritualism, which is the ability to supposedly communicate with the dead, go into a trance and communicate with the dead. was started by two girls, Margaret and Katie Fox.
Yeah.
And they claimed that they could communicate with the dead. Now, they actually held seances for royalty, czars and kings and, prime ministers. But they couldn't prove, no one could prove that they were fakers. How can you prove it? If you say you're talking to a dead person, how can you prove you're not talking to a dead person?
Yeah, it's not falsifiable.
Right. And but in the end, they confessed that they were fakers. And Arthur Ford was the greatest trance medium in the 20th century. He was the man who supposedly broke the Houdini code. He was able to contact Houdini for Houdini's wife, Bess, after Houdini died. And then later on in the 60s, he held a famous seance for Bishop Pike of the Episcopal Church.
Oh, yeah.
And Pike's son had committed suicide, and Pike was overtaken with grief and guilt, thinking that he was responsible for his son's death, and because he wasn't a very good father, according to his own testimony. And Ford went into trance and was able to make contact with Pike's son, and Pike got a lot of comfort. But in the end, after Ford died, one of the men who was writing his biography discovered that Ford actually had researched a lot of information about Bishop Pike and his son, and conversations and all kinds of things, and basically fed that back when he supposedly was in a trance. So that has caused many people to think that Ford was a faker from the beginning. And there's a debate on that. According to Ford, I had a friend who was Ford's protege, guy named
Ted Swagger.
Yeah. And he told me that Ford was so depressed much of his life because people would invite him to come to meetings, and maybe come to a big dinner, but they always wanted him to go into trance. He said he had to go into a trance in order to eat a meal or to get invited anywhere, because just like a preacher, they always want the preacher to say the prayer, so he's sort of for the meal. And Ford said, they won't let me stop. They won't let me stop. And he wanted to just stop doing that and just be a minister and a speaker. But people didn't want him to do that. They wanted him to go in trance and contact their dead relatives. And so he had this tremendous burden. And the theory is that sometimes he just was tired, or he couldn't go into trance. You just can't always just automatically put yourself into a trance. And when that happened, he would cheat. He relied on his research. So no one really knows what the story is with Ford.
Okay, I've got a question, and Christian and I discussed this before you came on screen. 1 Samuel 28, the medium at Endor. Okay, right. How would you, given your research, would you read that she was a faker and all of a sudden something happened that because she screamed in the middle of it? So it seems clear from the narrative that she was shocked at what happened.
Well, there's many explanations. So let's start with the faker explanation. So the scripture says that she perceived a being and she was shocked.
Yeah.
Well, who else? No one else. The scripture doesn't say anyone else saw that. It was only the Witch of Endor said she saw it, and she went, well, wouldn't that convince everybody that somebody was there? And why in the world would God ever conjure up one of his prophets when he's condemned witchcraft? Why would he allow a witch to? There's all kinds of theories why he would do it, but that's based on presuppositions.
Yeah.
You just look at the text.
Yeah.
She's the only one that saw the being, the so-called specter. She's the only one that heard the message. She conveys the message to Samuel. Right? Samuel. That's she calls Samuel. Saul. She conveys the message to Saul, and she says, if you go into battle, you're going to die. What's the chances of going into battle and dying? I mean, this is the greatest thing that psychics can do. They just tell you something like that, And if you go into battle and you die, well, guess what? First of all, no one else knows it except you. You're dead.
Yeah.
If you don't, you're glad you're alive. You forget about her. Say, "Whoop, I'm glad she was wrong on that one." So it doesn't have to be that she really was, that she conjured up the spirit of the prophet Samuel.
Yeah.
So I think God condemns that kind of stuff, because what happens is people depend on the psychic or the witch or those kinds of things rather than trust God for the needs. He does not want them to follow other gods and trust in psychic abilities, when in reality, Israel was to trust in him, and that was it.
And do you think, to the folks that you see out in Christendom now, kind of getting involved in some of this stuff, is the motivation power, or is it? I'm sure it's mixed motives, but what do you kind of see today on the? Is it to gain some kind of notoriety or to lord that over people? What do you see in the landscape of the church today?
Yeah. Well, in the area of psychic phenomenon, are you asking me about that, or
if you look in the pastorate, or you look at evangelists that are maybe practicing something that you would see as either a mentalist trick, a sleight of hand trick, do you see anything like that going on today as you look out?
Well, I haven't. I used to watch television quite a bit as far as the charlatan preachers and healers, and I would definitely make a distinction between the charlatans who use mentalist tricks. I don't want to name any of them right now, but and preachers who just believe that God heals when they pray. I mean, I think they're sincere people who believe God heals. Look, the scripture says, if any sick's among you, you should call upon the elders to lay hands on you and pray.
Sure.
So we believe that God heals. So I believe there are people out there that maybe even have a gift of healing. I don't think it's a permanent gift, in the sense, otherwise they'd clean out the hospitals. But God may manifest himself in healing through certain people at certain times. And I think that's legitimate. But then you also have other people that are fakers. They say they act like they can have a word of knowledge and know all about you, or they have a prophecy, or they claim that you're healing, and they bop you on the head. And people go down, and there's a certain clientele that sort of that follow those kinds of people.
Oh, yeah.
Those people are in it for the money. That's basically their purpose.
And when you're talking about those kind of fake evangelists or televangelists, and I'm thinking not only the modern ones, and there's no need to name names because people already see their faces as they're listening to us. But I'm thinking back of the healing revivals back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and some similar things that I'm filtering now through everything you've just told us. What you're saying is you could have fake healers, and they're not like a Peter Papa. That was a well-known fake, but that was an earpiece. That wasn't even mentalist. That was earpiece. But you're talking about something different than that, even.
Right. Well, now I'm talking about the Peter Popoffs who use mentalist tricks, and the earpiece is a mentalist trick. That's one of the ways the mentalists do things as well.
Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah. So, but there are other people, let's say like Oral Roberts had a big healing ministry. I have no reason to doubt that he was sincere, especially in the beginning. I mean, he would pray for people for hours, so and do I believe people got healed? Yeah, I believe people got healed. Probably many people got healed not because God healed them. Some people got healed simply based on the fact that they had faith. And faith triggers things happening in the body,
which you talk about in the last quarter of your manuscript.
Right. Yeah. There's something called the placebo effect, which is if you believe something, it can trigger certain mechanisms in your body. For example, a doctor can give you a sugar pill. Yeah. And say, take this and you'll feel better. And you take it and you feel better, and there's nothing in it. You think it's medicine, but it's not. And so, but you have faith.
Yeah.
You have faith that the pill is going to work. And we've discovered that this is amazing. I don't know if I've told this in the book, but pharmaceutical industry has to test all of their products before they put them on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And you take a pill for a certain ailment, it only has to, this is going to sound crazy, it only has to perform 8% better than a placebo pill. The placebo.
Wow. That's
if they can get it above 8%, the federal, was it FDA, I guess?
Yeah, FDA. Yep.
FDA will approve it.
Okay.
So just think about that. Only 8%. So,
and didn't you mention in the book the color of the pill matters?
Yeah, they say that purple pills.
Oh my gosh.
Purple pills, And then also, the doctor, just if he has a white lab coat on, you have more confidence in him. If it says, so-and-so M.D., rather than the doctor who just comes in his, short sleeves.
Okay. You touched on something in the book that I have been chewing on, not just because I read your manuscript, but chewing on for the last 12 years. You did touch a little bit on the so-called law of attraction. What do you make of that? Because you talked about The Secret, Rhonda Byrne's book. And what do you make of the law? Is there something to that in the atomic or subatomic realm, as some people say? Is it a way of explaining why birds of a feather flock together? What do you make of the so-called law of attraction?
So all of that falls into what's called autosuggestion. That's a broader category.
Okay.
And
Emil Coué, right?
Yeah, and Coué. Coué. His name is Coué. Yeah, Emil Coué. So what it is that basically you have either an affirmation or the so-called law of attraction that if you do positive things will happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
We know that's true. If I say, well, thank you for having me on your program, that's going to produce a positive response from you.
Yeah.
That's just natural. So there is this concept of autosuggestion, and that's where you receive a suggestion and it falls into your subconscious mind. In other words, it's not that you just mentally accept it.
Yeah.
For example, the guy told me, take off your glasses, you're healed. I said, taking off my glasses, I'm healed. But I wasn't healed. But if you can so that's me operating on my conscious level. Just take off your glasses and you're healed. But we have a subconscious level. And if you can just get that idea to drop down into your subconscious level and you really do accept it and believe it and live according to it. For example, I might say, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to get a raise, whatever it is. I just keep saying that over and over and over again. You say it 21 times every day. It'll actually become part of you and you'll believe it. It's not up here. You actually believe it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, then what happens is that when you are conscious during the day, you see opportunities, how you can reach that goal.
Okay.
You see? It's because that's become part of you. Now you see, how can I get a raise? Well, I can do this. I can go to the boss. I can say, thank you. I can do this. I can actually just go into his office and say, I need a raise. Would you give me a raise? I would have never done that before. But now I've been saying, I'm going to have a raise. I'm going to have a raise by the end of the year. I'm going to have a raise by the end of the year. I actually becomes part of me. And then I find opportunities to fulfill that, quote, suggestion. It's a self-fulfilled prophecy type thing. Mm-hmm. So we do work it out and it works because that's how we work. That's how it works.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
So name it and claim it kind of doctrine would fall in that category.
Right. So it's not name it and claim it as just name it and claim it and it's going to happen. It's that you name it so many times that guess what you end up doing? You end up doing things that make it happen, in a sense.
You become the answer to your own prayers.
So you see opportunities that you didn't see before, maybe to make money or whatever you want, or love, I'm going to marry, A, B, C, whatever it is. And you then see opportunities because you've actually convinced yourself. It's not just name it and claim it. That's what we'll call it name it and claim it because we want to sort of, push
put it in a context. Yeah.
But kind of the health and wealth gospel.
Here's how it really works. Now, do the people who practice that know that's how it works? No, they don't know that's how it works. They don't know that they are actually making the opportunities, finding the opportunities. Yeah, it's
P.T. Barnum once said there's a sucker born every minute. Wow.
Yeah. So things just don't happen because you say them.
Yeah.
You know, you have to actually believe it. And then when you believe it, then guess what happens? Then you begin to
act accordingly.
Yeah, act accordingly. And that's when the opportunities open up and you say, well, is it because I claimed it? I named it and claimed it. Now I can frame it. Right? Yeah.
I've got a question for you. The last quarter of your book, you were talking quite a bit about, for example, how you had practiced deep breathing techniques and relaxation techniques as you were preparing and taking your orals for your Ph.D.
Right.
And how it worked and it enabled things to come forth. Do you think in some ways that the unconscious or the subconscious is like an untapped gold mine just for human beings? Is that a fair read, or is it overblown?
I don't know how to. I wouldn't call it a gold mine. I guess.
The typical thing was the conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg. The subconscious is the iceberg underneath the water,
below the surface. Right. So you have your conscious mind, or what we're going to call the critical mind. You can study and study and study and study and go into a test and then just bomb that test, even though you know all the material. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, your critical mind is overloaded. It just can't function the way it should function. Mm-hmm. See, now there's some people that can operate that way, but many people can't. And so what you need to do, because you have studied and studied and studied, and especially for an oral like that, you've got that material down and you know it. Mm-hmm. Now what you have to do is be able to recall it. And so you have to get into a position where you're relaxed, where you're no longer operating at beta wavelengths. The brain mm-hmm. operates at different wavelengths. Mm-hmm. And the critical mind operates at what's called the beta wavelength. And then after that, you have your subconscious mind. That's what you're going to call your conscious mind. You're conscious all the time when you're operating at that level. Yeah. That's like how we are right now. We're very conscious of each other. We're talking and answering questions, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're right now operating at a beta level. That means the neurons in our brain are going at a certain speed, mm-hmm. and they're going pretty quickly. But when you relax and you start to imagine, for example, or you daydream, your conscious mind stops operating, and you now go into a slower brain wave speed. And so now you're in what's called the alpha state. And when you're in the alpha state, you're now operating what I would call it the subconscious mind. And mm-hmm. you can bring up all that information without any difficulty. And you can do a lot of things. That's when all these sort of paranormal experiences happen, is usually in the alpha state. So one of the things I'll say in my book is that when you relax and meditate, it doesn't even have to be meditate, just relax, close your eyes and just start imagining. The moment you do that, you're no longer conscious of the world around you. Mm-hmm. So I'd have lectures and I have students in my class and they would be in the front row, but their mind was a mile away, 100 miles away. And I was right in front of them and I was talking, and they've got two ears, but they mm-hmm. didn't hear me speak. And they had two eyes and they're looking right at me and they can't see me. Why? Mm-hmm. Because they're hearing the waves on the shoreline. Mm-hmm. And they're seeing, the sunset over the ocean, and they're daydreaming. Isn't that amazing? They're mm-hmm. seeing things not with these two eyes, and they're hearing things not with these two ears, because these two eyes and these two ears are focused on me. But guess what? They're not picking up anything. So mm-hmm. now they're operating at a subconscious level, at the alpha level, what I would call the alpha level. And this is really what I discovered, is how the brain waves determine these transcendental or paranormal experiences. And so it's when you're operating at that level that you're no longer working to come up with answers. when creative people usually operate at this level.
Sure.
Like when I wrote this book,
yeah,
there was times when it was so easy to write it, I didn't even have to think. But when I write my scholarly books, guess what I have to do? I mean, I am going over every word. But
completely beta. Yeah.
You could tell, hey, this thing flows. Mm-hmm. How did that happen? How did the guy write like that? Well, it's because I was writing half the time with my mind back on these events.
Yeah.
My experiences. And guess what? When I was thinking on those experiences, where was my mind? Back there. I was seeing Ted Swalger, and I was seeing Arthur Ford, and I was seeing all these psychics, and I was remembering what they said to me, and I was hearing them speak to me, and then I would just sort of write it down, So it's amazing how the subconscious mind really is the key to a lot of this, to understanding a lot of the paranormal.
Would you say,
Dr. Streett, if I could
sorry.
if I could just ask you one, we'll have to wrap up soon here. How would you apply that to Christ's parabolic teaching, where he talks about the idea of he who has ears to hear, let him hear, or eyes to see? How would that be? Would that be applicable to that kind of situation there?
I mean, it may be. It depends on what he meant by that. I mean, obviously, everybody had eyes and everyone had ears, but they weren't hearing it. They weren't getting the intent of what he was saying, but other people got it. This is what we call a trigger. For some people, what he said just triggered. Oh, a eureka moment. Now I see. See, other people it didn't. And we don't understand how all that happens. But what we do know is that when people those who had confidence in Jesus, think about that. They had faith in Jesus, and he said it, and guess what they did? They believed it, they accepted it. And others, guess what? They didn't have faith in Jesus. They said, who is this character? They saw him as a troublemaker, and they didn't get it. So, but for some people it triggered. And it has to do, again, with that subconscious state. It's where faith operates. Faith operates in this alpha state. That's why people can say, I believe in Jesus intellectually. And the next day, they no longer believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
They intellectually accepted some things, but didn't change their life.
Yeah.
But others, guess what? Wow. They just grab onto it. And they follow Jesus the rest of their life.
Fascinating.
Chris, you had another question?
God speaks in the scriptures, and other people can study the scriptures, and God doesn't say a thing to them. I mean, why is that? And there's a spiritual element too. I mean, we have to be careful because God speaks. He speaks. God moves. We don't want to ever negate any of that. It's not that, but God uses us the way we are. He created us the way we are. He created us with a brain that operates at different levels.
It's kind of a complicated mess, the way in which God speaks to you. It's a combination of, it may be a supernatural touch, but it has everything to do with your brain and how things are formed. Go ahead.
He spoke through dreams.
Yeah.
Just think about that. You're not even conscious when you're dreaming.
Yeah.
You're totally unconscious. That's the lowest level of subconscious mind that you can think of. Your brain is it's as slow as it gets. And guess what? But he speaks through the dreams, So it doesn't mean every dream is he speaking to you, but that's one of the ways he can speak to you. Yeah. So it shows you that he created us a certain way, and he speaks to us through the dreams. He can speak through us at different levels. So when, I think about Bill Bright, who founded Campus Crusade for Christ, he claimed that Bill Bright was just a pure evangelical.
Sure he was, yeah.
And he said he had a vision.
Yeah.
And in this vision, God told him to start Campus Crusade for Christ. A vision. He didn't say, I came up with 6 goals, wrote them down on a piece of paper. He said he literally had a vision. So I guess he had a vision. And that's what motivated him to start Campus Crusade for Christ. So, but the problem is, how can you tell when it's God and how can you when it's not God?
Yeah. What I was going to ask you was, one of the things that has been either a fad or a plague, depending on how you look at it, are afterlife, what have been called afterlife tourism books, where someone has a dream of hell, or they have a vision and they died and they went to heaven.
Right.
It is a lot of that to be deconstructed like that. Did they have real experiences, or is some of that a byproduct, or is it just, sorry, we just don't know?
I would say most people who said they were going to heaven did not go to heaven literally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did they mean when they say they went to heaven? Their soul went to heaven? Is that what they mean?
They probably would use Paul's language.
They would probably say, okay, I was caught up in the third heaven. Here's the things I saw.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when you say, well, what did you see? And when they say what they saw doesn't even compare what the scripture says.
Sure.
And it becomes an extra biblical revelation.
Yep.
Then I would say, well, I'm not saying they didn't have the experience, but their interpretation of that experience is not correct.
I guess where I'm going with it is, because some of these books, sorry, you got to follow the money, but a lot of these heaven tourism books or hell tourism books generate a lot of income. Okay.
That's exactly right.
And so I can't help but wonder if some of it, I'm not saying that somebody didn't necessarily have a horrific dream that they were in hell for whatever, but is it possible that they did not have a supernatural experience, but maybe they fed their mind with a lot of stuff from their reading, from medieval ideas about what hell means, and so it just regenerated in the form of an experience that they genuinely had.
Right, that's possible, and also some of them are just liars, as we know that the kid who said he died.
I'm thinking
the
about
father who made up the whole story. And I remember a number of years ago, the Happy Hunters, they were husband and wife charismatic.
Oh, yes.
Were promoting a book called Angels on Assignment. And in that book, the guy who claimed he saw angels, the angels came into his room. He had angelic encounters. And when he did, he described the angels as 6'6" and wearing turtleneck sweaters. And I thought, even in my worst days of bad theology, even that was too much for me. I said, I just can't believe that angels wear turtleneck sweaters. And this can't be true. How can these people be promoting this book? But they were promoting that book. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are just plain fakers.
Yeah.
And they do it for money or for whatever reason. And then there are people like you said, Christian, that have dreams and they interpret it as heavenly journeys. And they describe things that maybe they've read or part of their subconscious mind, but it's not biblical. And I don't know. I have never met anybody that I'm convinced went to heaven and came back. But, here's the thing. If they did do that, let's say we'd call that a miracle.
Okay.
Let's call that a miracle. Is there any way you can test a miracle?
No.
How can you test something that's supernatural?
Yes.
The test has to be something that can be replicated.
It's got to be replicated in a lab. That's not falsifiable.
Measurable, right? And this is why I say you cannot test that which is supernatural at all. So we don't know when somebody says I have a miracle. Well, you're either going to believe it or not believe it. I mean, that's just the way it is, right? So, but you can't test it. You can't prove that. You can't prove it any more than you can prove Jesus' resurrection. That's why I think when people try to prove his resurrection, they fall into a trap because guess what? You can't prove a miracle.
Yeah.
You can take the scripture's word for it.
Yeah.
Say, I believe these guys are telling the truth. They're not out there lying. Why would they do that? But you can't prove a miracle. So when I give you 20 evidences that Jesus was raised from the dead, unless I'm just giving you biblical passages, I'm really going in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Because I can't prove a miracle. I can't prove the virgin birth. I can't prove a miracle. I can't prove resurrection. I can't prove anything. See, I can give you I can tell you what I believe, but I can't prove it.
Yeah.
Right? I can't prove that Lazarus was raised from the dead unless I believe the Bible's telling me the truth.
Yeah.
But that's not a proof. That's just me accepting the scripture.
Yeah, you're accepting testimony. Yeah.
Right. That's accepting a testimony.
And some people can be gravely mistaken. As a child, I fell asleep in my parents' car and had a dream I was in hell, and I was just on the Jersey Turnpike in Secaucus.
That's true.
Well,
Yeah,
Dr. Streett, we want to wrap up this episode and just give a big shout out to you and thank you for coming on. You've given us a lot to talk about. I think we're going to have to do an episode 2 here soon and probe into some other areas. I said to Criswell, I was reading your book. I don't know any other rabbit hole that he hasn't gone down in this idea of spiritual and mysticism, and it's just such a fascinating read. But we want to thank you and thank everybody for tuning in to Christian Squared. This episode will be out soon. It'll be on all of our media sites. Want to just remind you to click like. We're kind of like Sally Fields. We want to know you like us, and also share Christian Squared with anybody you feel this could be applicable for. Also, just want to remind you that Christian Squared is sponsored by New Life CNY, which is a gospel-centric church looking to help people learn to live life through the power of the gospel. But once again, thank you so much, Dr. Streett, for coming on and sharing with us and sharing your manuscript with us.
Appreciate it.